Tragic news with the passing of Anne Rice at the age of 80, the famous novelist, perhaps most famously of Interview with the Vampire. And coincidentally, I was going to do some playlists more focused on female creators, not necessarily writers, but also producers. For instance, Deborah Snyder helped with a lot of the Zack Snyder films. Amazing coincidence, but also very tragic. Well, I can't claim to be a Rice expert. I've only gone through a few of her novels. I would say she is a very good writer, but does she qualify among the ranks of the truly great, transcendently amazing authors, whether male or female, in the 20th century? I would say no. She's a very good writer within her domain, but it's ironic, even though I'm not as intensely into vampire fiction, I am trying to use vampires as well as werewolves in some of my fiction, but I can't say I've been overly influenced by her. But I'm sure I'm kind of the exception to the rule because I would label myself a George R. R. Martin expert. And going through Fever Dream, which I still maintain is probably his best work, it often occurred to me reading it, I was like, wow, this is really, really, really close to Interview with the Vampire, but also very, very different. So her influence has been very widespread, but not necessarily positive or just people imitating the style. I can still remember parts of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where it seems very clearly Joss Whedon is poking fun at her and refusing to do a lot of her tropes. Because after her, good or bad, again, this was already there, but sort of the S word and vampires will be linked for a long time due to her influence. Which is somewhat ironic, even though she's labeled a gothic author. If you look at her work closely, it's very, very postmodern. There's a lot of self references, very kind of mocking tone, which I sometimes appreciate and sometimes I don't. So it's very mixed with me on her, just as a writer. I doubt you'll have the major influence of a J.K. Rowling or even Isabella Allende, but she's made her mark. She lived a very long life, apparently very wealthy at the end of her life, at least 50 million in net worth, and managed to have her works adapted into various forums, from film to television, even a musical, as well as comics. And I'd have to say, very prodigious output, at least 30 novels. So, in terms of at least getting a chance to speak and finish off a lot of her stories, I doubt there's many unfinished works that we really need to work through to get a good sample of her vision. So, at the very least, she was published, and many writers never get published and die in extreme poverty or complete neglect. But what her ultimate influence will be, or even whether she's going to be with us in terms of the long term, I don't know. But if you are, again, very much into gothic fiction, horror fiction, vampire fiction, I think she's going to be sort of a figure you can't entirely avoid. But what to make of her, quote, merits as a writer, much less female writer, and how much she's going to inspire new writers, it's going to be a question that remains to be seen. But I would end that she actually started off fairly late in life as an author. So that's also my situation. I'm coming into it somewhat later than most other writers. So if you do feel like you can become a very good novelist, don't think that age is necessarily a barrier. So some very tragic news, but it'll be interesting over time how we're going to be assessing and reassessing her work. Thanks for listening.